Okay, let's discuss a Zercher Good Morning. Let's discuss what muscles we're working, what we're looking for, some common mistakes, and some things to avoid, all right? First, let's go ahead and go over the general movement pattern of what we're looking for in a Zercher Good Morning. Any good morning is a hip hinge position. Zercher just means we are holding the weight in a certain position. In this situation, Zercher movements are typically held in front of you, close to your body, okay? Preferably using a barbell, but of course, if we don't have a barbell, we're gonna use what we do have available, AKA likely dumbbells. And so if we remember what a hip hinge is, and we can think, okay, a good morning is a hip hinge, we can remember what we're looking for in that movement pattern as we complete every single rep. So when we're talking about a hip hinge, we always need to remember that the motion starts and ends in our hips. It's about a horizontal motion with our hip. It's not about an up and down motion with our upper body, okay? So when we talk about a hip hinge coming backwards, pushing our hips back, we are actively pushing our hips back as far as we can. But I want you to pay attention here. I do have a soft bend in my knees to allow more range of motion, okay? If I did not allow a soft bend in my knees and I just simply stuck my hips back, I would have less range of motion. This would be a little bit more indicative of a stiff leg, which would target slightly different muscle groups. So a traditional hip hinge in this good morning, we are gonna stick our hips back, and that naturally allows a soft bend in our knees, all right? If you will also notice, my shins are vertical. So when you see me in your form feedback say, hey, it looks like your shin is leaning back, this is what I mean. There's no bend in your knees, your shins are leaning back, okay? So we wanna maintain a vertical orientation with our shins. It's gonna start in your hips. You're gonna go ahead and push those hips back until you can't anymore. This is the end of my range of motion, soft bend in the knee, shins are vertical. I want you to pay attention to the fact that my back is not completely horizontal. I still have quite a bit of a diagonal, don't I? That's because the goal of a hip hinge, good morning, thrust, deadlift, whatever variation, is not to bend forward as far as you can, okay? It has nothing to do with that. It instead has everything to do with how far back you can push your hips. So wherever your upper body lands, that's wherever it lands, okay? So once you've reached the end of your range of motion, just like a hip thrust, how you thrust your hips up, in this case, we are gonna thrust our hips forward, okay? So we are actively contracting and engaging our glutes to push hips forward, and inadvertently, our upper body straightens as a result. The second thing we want to pay attention to in any hip hinge, specifically a deadlift or a good morning, no matter if it's a Zercher Good Morning in front of us with the weight or a traditional good morning with the weight behind us, is we want that weight to track along our leg line or as close to our leg line as possible. And the reason I say that is the further away that weight from your lower back, the more tension and pressure you're putting on your lower back, okay? So the more likelihood your lower back is gonna round because it has to overcompensate because the weight is so far away, all right? We're not necessarily trying to focus and target our lumbar spine, okay? So instead, we wanna make sure that that weight is as close to us as possible, all right? We are rolling our shoulders back to keep that neutral spine. Weight is as close to those legs as possible, so it doesn't matter if you're doing a deadlift with a barbell. It doesn't matter if you are doing a deadlift with two dumbbells on the side of you. Your weight wants to track along that leg line, and therefore it's gonna, number one, protect that lower back, and also number two, allow the muscle groups that we're intending to use to be recruited, and therefore you're getting the most out of the movement. So when we're talking about a Zercher position, it's a hip hinge movement. It starts and ends in our hips. Doesn't matter how low our upper body goes. And we want to try to keep the weight as close to our leg line, as close to our person as possible. Here's the most common mistake I see with Zercher squats, good mornings, any Zercher variation, okay? When we bend forward, that weight peels away from us, all right? It's very normal, it's very natural, okay? But look at how far away that weight is to my lower back. This is gonna put a lot more tension on your lower back. You're gonna feel it in your lower back. You're gonna have less control over this movement compared to if you were to actively keep that bar attached to your person, okay? So just know every time that you take that hip hinge and you lower your body, it's going to naturally pull away. You gotta fight against that, okay? That's something that we have to be cognizant of. Number one, for safety, and number two, to make sure that we're targeting the intended muscle groups. If you'll notice, my barbell has a hip thrust bar pad, okay? And that's because steel on your body without any kind of protection or padding, that's just painful. So similarly as to why a hip thrust bar pad might be helpful in a hip thrust, so your hip bones aren't against steel, same regarding your elbow crease and steel, okay? It's not comfortable. Our focus shifts away from the movement pattern, and instead it shifts focus to, oh my gosh, this is uncomfortable. Oh my gosh, this hurts. You know what I mean? So it's a $10 bar pad. There's one in your suggested equipment list, but we want to make sure that we are using appropriate tools, and some of these tools can be used in many different variations, which is why they're super helpful. The last thing that I want to go over is where we are supposed to be feeling this good morning, okay? So a good morning is a hip hinge movement. You are going to feel it in your hips or your glutes. You are going to feel it a little bit in your hamstrings, but because of where the weight is distributed on your body, it's higher compared to a deadlift or a hip thrust. And also it's in front of you compared to next to you, like a deadlift, okay? And so therefore, when we push those hips back, allow the soft bend in our knees, shins are neutral, weight is close to us, we are actively pulling that weight. We're also targeting our lower back, okay? So this kind of helps us strengthen our lower back, which is going to be helpful in order to keep progressing in any hip thrust, deadlift, hip hinge variation moving forward. Okay, so now let me show you a side-by-side of what we want to avoid compared to what we are looking for, and I think you're going to be good to go after this. What we want to avoid is we are just bending forward and that weight is pulling far away from our person. There is not really any hip engagement happening here. There's no hamstring engagement happening here. Our lower back is simply just allowing us to bend forward and stand up. Instead, what we're looking for here is holding that bar as close to us as possible. We are pushing our hips back. We are allowing a soft bend in our knees, and wherever we can't push those hips back anymore, as we are actively pulling that barbell into our person, we are going to engage our glutes and push those hips forward to stand. It's a different variation of a hip hinge movement, which is exactly why we're taking a break from other hip hinge movements and focusing on these to get stronger over time.